Hey, what is up guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. In today's video we're going to continue on with my Group 1 car reviews, in which we hope to review and rank every single Group 1 car in GT7, coming up with a definitive list from worst to best in terms of every car from this class. Now we're moving back to the VGT versions of the Group 1 vehicles, this time with perhaps the most insane of the bunch. This is the Peugeot L750R hybrid VGT from 2017. This is an absolute rocket ship of a vehicle. Now in terms of the price point, it's the typical VGT price point as well as the typical Group 1 price point. 1 million credits to acquire this car. In terms of its PP rating, it sits at 888.68, 693 brake horsepower, weighing 825 kilograms, and it is turbocharged. Obviously includes a hybrid system considering the actual name of this vehicle. So overall these stats are definitely speaking for themselves when it comes to the overall, category of Group 1. This thing really does stand out. So let's move on to the lap itself and we'll talk about the car and review it in terms of the context of Gran Turismo 7 and how this car feels. So when it comes to the Peugeot VGT Group 1, I feel like this car is massively slept on by the entire GT7 player base, myself included. In fact, this was perhaps one of the final cars I ever picked up in the entire game. However, I did have a few memories of this vehicle, especially when it comes to the harder difficulties and the Group 1 prototype series. This was the car that is perhaps the bane of a lot of people's existence in those events, considering it is an absolute rocket ship. The ones on Grand Valley Highway 1 and even up to Suzuka and such, this thing absolutely rocket ships itself down the straights compared to anything else, and it really is the car that will give you a ton of trouble. I believe it is Wilk that drives this car in terms of those events, and you will constantly see him setting fastest laps. However, the kind of downside to this is that that car does pit a ton of time, so it really is perhaps one of the more memorable cars in terms of the single player experience of GT7. And well, when it comes to being rocket ship fast, there is absolutely no denying that. This car, when you start driving it for yourself, is insanely quick, and you can see why that car performs so well in these Group 1 prototype events. It really is an absolutely ridiculous machine. Now when it comes to the hybrid performance, that's why I think a lot of people kind of turn their heads away from it, expecting it to be very much on par with the LMP1 machines, which we all know usually in comparison to the Group C machines that we see, or the older, more historic Group 1 cars, are typically much slower in terms of their straight line speed, considering the hybrid will usually spit itself out and then just completely run out and leave you hanging. And well, that's not the case when it comes to the Peugeot. It absolutely is constantly deploying that hybrid speed. It goes up to some ridiculous top ends, sometimes upwards of 220 to 230 miles per hour, as well as having the grip of a more modern LMP1 machine. This thing literally does it all, and I feel like it is a bit of an underrated gem, especially when it comes to a lot of the single player events. Now under BOP, there is no denying that this car just isn't as good. It does take a very heavy nerf when BOP comes into effect, but we're not reviewing that today. We are reviewing the car itself, its usability, its tunability, and how well it performs in overall Gran Turismo 7. And I feel like when it does come to a lot of these more higher powered events, this car, whilst it does have a very high performance point rating, is very capable of tackling pretty much anything. Again, the only thing that I feel like really does kind of turn myself away from it and using it more long term is just mainly the tyre wear. Considering you're putting all this power through constantly and you are naturally going to want to run this car as fast as possible, you'll find that tyre life and fuel usage just isn't necessarily as good as some of the other Group 1 cars, and that seems to be the sort of, trade-off for having such high performance stats. But considering just how fast this thing is and how capable it is of tackling almost any track in the entire game, that really is not a bad trade-off to have. Yes, you'll be filling, fueling more. Yes, you'll be pitting for tyres more, but definitely considering the gap you'll probably blast out compared to all other Group 1 machines, this thing is an absolute monster. So typically when it comes to a lot of the Group 1 machinery, you'll see people mentioning, the LMP1 machines, considering their insane downforce levels and that boost from the hybrid, or you'll see them mentioning, some of the Group C legends such as the 787B, Sauber and such. So I feel like the Peugeot really doesn't get a look in by the majority of the player base. And again, I think it's kind of a mix of, it just really isn't a car that at face value typically looks like a Group 1 machine. It looks more like a, sort of hill climb time attack machine, and obviously it's a VGT, and I know a lot of the player base will naturally turn away from them, myself included. I am not typically a fan of any of the VGT Group 1s over anything such as the LMP ones or the Group C category of cars within this overall category. So I can see why it is a bit of an underrated gem, and I can see why a lot of people will just completely ignore it. I mean, typically, let's be honest, that Peugeot badge isn't necessarily the first thing when you think about modern day performance, and again, that is kind of a bias that I do have. Whilst okay, give me a 205 and stuff like that, they're absolutely awesome, when it comes to modern day Peugeots, I just feel like a lot of people kind of forget that they are pumping out some pretty fairly cool models. And I think a lot of this technology as well when it comes to the car itself is just absolutely fantastic. I could genuinely see this being put into some of the more hypercar categories and such a little bit further down the line. It really doesn't feel too out of bounds of reality, and like I said, when it comes to the overall styling and such, it certainly kind of lends itself to a more Pikes Peak style alongside like a modern day version of the Suzuki Escudo rather than a Group 1 machine. But when it comes to performance, I definitely don't think you should sleep on this one. If you've never given it a try like I didn't for the longest time, considering it was one of the final cars I picked up in the game, then I certainly recommend checking this one out. It's insanely quick, and when I mean insanely quick, I mean by an absolute margin as well. Compared to anything else when it comes to one lap performance, I definitely think the Peugeot is going to be a tough cookie to beat. It's certainly one that may end up at the top of the ranking boards for a very, very long time. And that's where we're going to move on to next, the overall ranking. Now, obviously, this is the fastest of the Group 1 category of cars, whilst it even does have a little bit less of a performance point rating than something like the Audi VGT. However, it is actually the first car of the bunch to actually knock away one of the super formulas. So overall, it sits fourth, the PP rating of 888.68, racing mediums, an absolute rocket ship, leading the rest of the Group 1 vehicles at this present time by around about over 8 seconds, which is just bizarre. So if you haven't checked out this Peugeot VGT Group 1 yet, I fully recommend just giving it a try and letting me know what you think. For me, it's absolutely a must buy. Thank you to my channel members, Lewis Vieira, Old School Gamers, Crazy Cobra, JRO49, Cole Wyatt, Phil Wilmot, Dominic Saylor, Dan, Sean and Chris 75572. Massive thank you for your continued support. It absolutely means the world to me. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you think of the Peugeot down below, and I will see you in the next one. Take care guys. Peace.